Just want to welcome everybody here to Skiba's Gym. I'm Eric with Universal. Obviously, I think you guys know who Dan is. So we like to do these things called the Animal Barbell Club. We've had hundreds of them in all different cities, all different countries. We're going to do one in Germany next week. And basically, it's a gathering for people who are into hardcore lifting, want to train together, want to learn from each other. So it's the spreading of knowledge and motivation and learning. So what we're going to do, we're going to have Dan do a little Q&A with you guys. So you guys will have your opportunities to ask him any questions you want. We do have a little time constraint because they do have to fly out. So we're going to do the Q&A for 45 minutes. And then at 1 o'clock, if you guys want to train, you feel free to train. That's what it's all about. All right? I want to thank Skiba. Where are you, Henri? Well, Henri's somewhere here. He's the proprietor of this great gym. It's an awesome gym. I'm sure he'll tell you that you're welcome here at any time. It's a great atmosphere, not just the equipment, but it's the atmosphere and the learning that you get here. So, that's the way, man.
What would you say is the best way to correct a lockout?
Usually for deadlifts, the lockout's it's not the problem itself. It's usually just how you pick the weight up off the floor. So it usually comes down to just being tighter off the floor, having a little more technique. If you get to the top and your back is that rounded, then that means you didn't stay tight in your back enough at the starting point.
So it just gets stronger?
For a lot of people, for conventional, that's kind of tough. So doing some block pulls are helpful. It helps build more tightness in the start. And doing, just kind of making sure your technique is actually correct in the first place.
If you had to say 2 things that you learned this year that made you a better lifter, what would those 2 things be?
Yeah, I don't know that I've had any like big epiphanies this year. I think the things I've been trying to work on starting since last year with the bench, just really cleaning up my technique, keeping the bar path kind of the priority, not so much the speed. I would say that's really the biggest thing that I've been thinking about more recently. And then last year just being able to kind of get back into using more stretching in the lower body. So just trying to keep my squats and deadlifts moving well.
Any specific mobility work you actually do, like on a day-to-day basis?
For me personally, I don't do a lot of stretching in the upper body because it's always maintained itself. I have really good like thoracic spine mobility, so my shoulders stay pretty healthy. The only thing I'll stretch in the upper body that's probably important for a lot of people will be stretching out the forearms and biceps because a lot of people are really tight, and maybe that's, I don't know, that seems like a spot where if you hold a lot of tension, it's going to limit your strength, and it's also probably maybe a risk for like a tear. So, that's not anything anybody wants. But the biggest things for me personally for the lower body is I stretch out the ankles a lot. So whether it's like a straight-legged calf stretch or a calf stretch in like a squatting position, and then for me, just stretching out the groin and the hips a lot. And then I'll use like a foam roll sometimes to work on the IT band and quads to kind of keep all that loosened up.
I noticed in my gym a lot of the younger coaches are very big on specificity now. I make them overall strong first. A lot of different movements, different forms of squats and whatnot. What are your thoughts on that? Before I worry about Wilks or anything like that, body weight, we just try to get as big and strong as possible first.
Well, I definitely agree with you that just getting bigger and stronger first is pretty helpful, because that was my background was, I trained from, I just, worked out or trained, whatever you want to call it, just to get bigger and stronger and to look sexier, those kind of things. That was all before I was, a power lifter. But I do see a lot of guys that start off and all they want to do is like think about cutting weight for their first meet and things like that. And I tell them, like, it's not a competition to see who's skinnier, it's a competition to get stronger and bigger. So that part I definitely agree with. As far as like, is it better to start off with specificity or like more variety? The biggest thing to me is just that whatever you're doing, the quality should be like the focus. Because it's always easy to just add weight later if you just build good technique and the thing that I always say is like if you're lifting free weights, the trick is the good lifters keep tension on the bar the whole way through the range of motion. In a machine, it does it automatically for you, but the bad lifters can't stabilize the bar. So you can always muscle your way through a bunch of different things, but to me, in the beginning, it doesn't really matter so much what lifts you do, as long as whatever you're doing it, with good form and, like I said, keeping tension on the bar. Some people don't always have the range of motion or the flexibility to do every lift that you want, so you can start them off with, varieties that work for them, and then as they improve as a lifter or mobility, they can add more things to it.
When you do deadlifts, you do them with your back day or leg day?
Both, but my main day, I mean, I have a deadlift day, so I do a lot of volume of deadlifting, and then when I do my leg days, I also deadlift, but it's lighter, or it's just less. Yeah, but I don't do like a heavy day after legs usually. As far as why, I think the thing that I think about is whatever I can do first in a workout is going to get the most attention and the most energy, so it's not going to be inconsistent. So my deadlift's gotten a lot better during the course of time when I have split up the squatting and deadlifting, being able to basically just do more volume of deadlifting, and yeah, I think that's about it. For me, doing a lot of back squatting, I always do that first in the leg day, but I think the other varieties are the things for me that help a lot as well, just to kind of build more leg strength than the pure like low bar back squats. But I try to train my back pretty much whenever I train.
How old were you when you started powerlifting, lifting weights, and what was your style of training?
So when I was 12, junior high, we go to like PE class, and there was like some weights in the in the locker room where we changed. So every day I would go over and like max out while I was getting dressed on bench, and that was how I started. I think when I was 13, my parents got me like a small weight set, like a 85-pound bar or something like that in my room. So I would just do curls and rows and stuff like that every day. And then I think at 15, I started reading like magazines, like, and I learned that you could do like back workouts and go to the Y and squat. And pretty much all the way through college, I just trained to get bigger and stronger. And once I was out of college and I was a personal trainer, I was 24, I decided I would start training for my first meet. So before that, I didn't really categorize how I trained. It was just lifting weights, trying to get big.
Well, I had a question. I had a client ask me about grip, and if she should ever switch that to not create a muscle imbalance, and honestly, I had no idea how to answer that question.
In my experience, I've always gripped the exact same way since I was like 14 or 15. So I guess if you switch the one hand that's always over to the one hand that's now under, it's a lot of stress on the body in a position it's not really accustomed to. So, I mean, I think a lot of people do well with, mixing up and using double overhand with straps as part of their training approach for, some of the volume they do, but I've never switched sides, so I don't really know.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I mean, I definitely think it builds a little bit of a difference in like how it loads up the upper back and the shoulder blades, just because of one being internally and one being externally rotated. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really overthink it that much, so.
What do you feel like helps your sumo deadlift out the best?
As far as like warming up, I mean, I do a lot of stretching for the hips and groin. As far as how to get it stronger, I think getting the hips stronger is doing a lot of block pulls and getting the leg stronger. I find like front squats are really helpful for that. And as far as of course, just doing a lot of volume of sumo squatting is important too. But those will be kind of the main accessory ones. And I'll still do a lot of conventional pulling too after the sumo. And the second day of the week will always be like conventional stuff. So.
In a meet, like, what's your mentality? Like, do you like focus on like a particular person? Like, say you want to beat, like, say if you and Pete Rubish were in a meet, like, oh, I want to beat Pete Rubish bad. Like, do you like isolate yourself, stuff like that nature? Just,
No, I mean, whenever I compete, I just train as hard as I can, so I'm ready, and then I just focus on. I mean, the best way to beat anybody is to just put together the best total. So if I'm competing with somebody, then I will, sort of use some strategy as far as like what I think they will be able to lift. So as I go through squats and bench, there's a moment to be maybe a little more conservative or a little more aggressive, but no, I don't really get hung up on like who I'm competing against. Just trying to win. I don't think it really matters who you be competing against either.
Around the same line, I don't know if you're still planning to compete. You just got surgery, but of the newer guys like Larry, Oak, they all have a chance of breaking your records. Do you plan on taking it back?
I mean, when I return, I mean, I'm just going to try to lift as much as possible. So, I, assume that'll be part of the plan.
What's your basic warm up for leg day?
The biggest thing for me when I do my leg day is stretching out. If I'm squatting or deadlifting, I like to stretch out my ankles and the Achilles a lot. That would be kind of like the first thing. I'll just do. I do a lot of stretching like on the ground, well, basically like opening up the hips, like trying to stretch the groin out, trying to stretch the adductors out. I'll stretch out the hips a little bit, the hip flexors. I think sometimes people get told like static stretching is not really very helpful, but the science on that is like really bogus science. It's the problem is if you were to, let's say you were to like static stretch and then like immediately go and lift like 5 seconds later, that would probably be a problem. Because if you stretch and you stand up, you feel a little bit stiff for a moment. But the way we train is so slow that that's not really a factor. If you can't get in position because you're too tight, you're not going to lift better than if you can get in position. So yeah, it just takes a lot of loosening up for me in the hips and groin and the ankles so I can squat in a proper position. And I usually just warm up the legs, a lot of bodyweight squats, and then when I put the first weight on the bar, if I need to do more than one set to really feel like warm and like I can move the bar in the right place, then do 2 or 3 if I need to. And once I get through the first weight, then I just kind of progress a little faster with less and less reps. Not too much, but yeah, I think just like bodyweight squats is kind of the main one for warming up and the stretching.
What's your diet?
What's my diet? If I'm training for meet and I need to be able to cut, normally I'd have about 4 meals a day. I would have oatmeal and a lot of I'd usually mix oatmeal with kind of like Animal makes the whey, so I'll mix that together and I'll have a bunch of egg whites for breakfast, maybe like 1 whole egg. Just usually my second and third meals of the day would be like noon and then like 4 o'clock. And I'll basically just have something along the lines of chicken or steak and rice or some like starchy foods, but not a lot of like carbs, just still kind of low. Usually work out in the evenings, and then after that, a lot of times I'll have some like protein shakes with it just to kind of keep the protein high. And then I'll either have kind of a similar meal after I work out, or I'll just have a lot of cereal just because I like the carbs right after the workout. Yeah, I don't really do well with like a low carb diet, so I just try to keep it low throughout the day but high after the workouts. But right now I'm not really trying to keep my weight in check, so I like to eat a lot of protein, and I also just eat whatever else I feel like. So, I mean, I have a big appetite, so I eat a lot.
So I'm trying to gain 15 pounds.
Yeah. No, the most important thing is that you take in a lot of protein and like consistently throughout the day. I think the biggest thing that when I talk to people whose goal is to gain weight and they have a hard time with it, there's usually like, if I sort of like, let's say interrogate them about what they've eaten, there's usually like a lot of good meals, and then there would be like a big gap when they told me, oh, I forgot to eat for like 9 hours or something. And if your goal is to gain that weight, I mean, I don't think you need to eat like a slob, but you should have a lot of protein. And I think the carbs, you just need to kind of find out like what kind of level of carbs, if it was just like a starch, or there might be something like that you do well with. Maybe it's pasta, or maybe it's potatoes, maybe it's bread. But you just kind of have to have a couple go-to things that you can just keep putting away a lot of calories with. Okay. The other thing is, if you're trying to gain weight, one thing that will definitely help is if you reduce the amount of activity you have for like a few months. Because those have been some of the times when I've been able to put on the most weight, is when I've gone from like a lot of activity and then reduced by a lot. Because the training still has the same effect, but then your recovery is a lot higher. And so a lot of times you can have a high metabolism and then just like outwork any chance of putting on the weight. So I mean, you can see like stories of like Michael Phelps. I don't know what they say, he eats like 10,000 calories a day, but he's shredded and he's not going to put on weight because he's just constantly active. So that's kind of the thing. Some people are high metabolism and a little too active. You got to slow things down.
What are some things that worked for you in the past that now you're noticing as you're getting older and now you're getting more experience, lifting obviously a lot of weight, that now I can't do exercise X, I had to replace it with this exercise?
I don't know. There's not really a lot that I like no longer do. Yeah, I can definitely overdo it on my elbow a little bit if I just do too much volume of like tricep training, and I'm also squatting at the same time. That can kind of be hard on that, but I think as I've gotten older, what I've realized is just that I need to make sure I actually take the time to make sure I can move properly when I lift. Am I keeping symmetry? Am I keeping my my ankles and my hips taken care of so that they can actually move well? A lot of times what people don't realize is when you're just like stretching right before you lift so you can lift, that gets you through the workout. But the problem is if you're tight all the time between the workouts, is those muscles are going to be very weak. Because what you got to think about is, everyone always goes by this like saying where you get stronger after the workout, like when you go home and you rest and all that. And ideally, you want the muscles to be as strong and as as explosive as possible while you train. But by the same token, when you're resting, which is the other 20 some hours of the day, or all the days in between the workouts, those muscles need to be actually relaxed in order to get proper rest. So if your hips are constantly tight, when you go to work out, they're not going to be strong because they're going to be tired from being tight all the time. So it's important that you can find whatever avenue of kind of taking care of yourself that works, whether it's stretching or someone to like massage you, or a chiropractor, but whatever helps you to kind of stay loose so you can actually rest while you're supposed to be resting and not not being tight all the time.
So you're still able to handle the same amount of volume that you handled, back when you first started training?
The intensity is a lot higher because I'm stronger and a better lifter, and my technique is better than when I started. So I can tend to handle a lot more. And as far as doing the same exercises, there's really not a lot that I've dropped other than things that I don't think are very valuable.
What's your frequency like? I mean, how many days a week are you training, and for what kind of duration are you doing?
You mean duration as far as like how long does a workout take?
Like how long typically?
Sure. I'll say average upper body day is probably like 2 hours, maybe a little more. I can get through them quicker if I push myself to, but probably the squat days and deadlift days will take a little longer, just because when I'm lifting heavy, and I've been dealing with the quad problem for the last couple of years, so that's taking a lot more time to warm up before I train. So as far as the frequency, when I'm training for meet, usually I'll be 4 or 5, 6 times a week where I'll train, whether it's 3 lower body days and 2 upper body days, or 2 and 2 or 3 and 3. Sometimes I'll train the upper body 4 times a week. Sometimes I'll mix them together, I'll do shoulders after I squat or deadlift. Sometimes when I'm not training, right now, I'm just training twice a week. But for the last few months, I've just been benching. So just benching twice a week is fine. A lot of times when I'm trying to gain weight, it's easier to gain weight when I have fewer workouts. And when I'm trying to get down to when I compete at 220, I try to get my weight, I have to get my weight down before I can make the weight. So I need to do more workouts with kind of more tempo on some of the accessory lifts, just to kind of, it's almost like that's doubling as cardio. So the, the accessory stuff with dumbbells and machines, I get through that on a pretty quick pace when I'm trying to get lighter. And I need more workouts to basically keep the activity level high.
You don't find yourself overtraining, getting 5 or 6 workouts a week?
I never really feel burned out. There'll definitely be times when I feel I didn't quite recover all the way before the next workout, but I don't feel it's necessarily, the most important thing is not necessarily how do I perform when I work out as far as how much weight do I lift that session, but more importantly is do I just perfect the motion repeatedly. So if I can still come in and lift with good form, it's more important that I'm just engaged and I'm practicing what I'm doing and I'm moving more volume, because later on when my kind of the training phases kind of shift, I'll catch up on the rest later, and that's kind of where you expect your body to start to progress more. So there's times when it's sort of intentionally just ramping up the volume. So yeah, your body's going to have to catch up when you're pushing it to do more volume. But a lot of times certain lifts, when I push them with more volume, they'll respond and go up immediately. So I feel the bench is probably not that one, it needs more recovery. But when I deadlift more frequently, my back gets stronger just because I think it just keeps more tension. I don't know. If I do more medium deadlift workouts throughout the week, 3 or 4 times a week, that'll usually give me a quick surge in strength.
So you're keeping the percentages 50-60% then? You're not...
No, I don't ever go that light. If I deadlift, the biggest things that will make me sore will be heavy conventional pulls. So if I do a lot of stiff leg deadlifts, if I do a lot of sumo deadlifts, If I do beltless sumo deadlift, so I do conventional with the deficit, none of those really make me that sore. But it's only when I'm really straining on like a very high percentage of conventional deadlift that I'm really going to be like set back in terms of how much I can train. So because I can train my back and it's not causing like any kind of stress to like the ligaments or like overdoing it, I'm able to do it more frequently. And I think that's an important thing to consider if the back is something that has a lot of like recovery kind of cost. I trained one guy who he was kind of like was built kind of like a bowling ball. He's a pretty stocky guy. For him, I would have him train sumo because he could recover every week between the workouts. But if he trained conventional, he's a little bit stronger. Like his deadlift was probably like 3 to 5% better. But training sumo let him train more frequently. And so by the end, when we finished and we were ready for a meet, you just switch back to conventional. He might need like 3 weeks to recover in terms of the soreness from that. But the meet, it doesn't really matter. So for him to be able to manage how much deadlifting he could do, it was better to train sumo. And that was kind of that's a good example of that, but that's not always how it is. I think a lot of people just don't have very good technique, and so they tend to just overdo it with the back as opposed to making the legs and the kind of just locking everything in place. So yeah, I mean, if that's the case, then it can be pretty stressful. The other thing for me is doing a lot of volume of like lighter deadlifting really helps the back to recover. So stiff leg deadlifts are really helpful because the more of those I can kind of keep in my training, the quicker I recover, and then the better my back. I mean, one thing that's important when you think about how your back tolerates deadlifting is when you pull a heavy deadlift, your back starts to round. So the good deadlifters have their back round uniformly from one vertebrae to the next. So you're not putting all the stress in one spot on the spine, you're distributing it kind of equally across the lumbar spine or through the thoracic spine. So for me, when I deadlift, my lower back stays pretty straight, but my lower like thoracic spine bends a lot. But that's how I've trained it, and the stiff leg deadlifts build that as well. So the muscle mass is there to support that, and that spot in the spine is not really prone to being injured by a lot of flexion. It's not the same as the lumbar spine. So yeah, it's just sort of building it with like a big foundation of like volume. With the weights when I do my stiff legs, they're still probably like 60, 70, 80% of what I would deadlift normally. So it's just a lot of reps there.
We talk a lot about technique, foundation. So looking at the bench, we talk about solid setup, solid leg drive. And then we get to the cage and you're knocking out 500 plus with no legs. So was there any difference in your training setup, how you prepared for that, or was that just more of attrition because you couldn't do anything else for so long? It just kind of happened.
I mean, my thought process for all the things that you said was, for me, going into the cage, so when you set up like and you bench and you get a tight setup, it's half your upper back tightness and it's half your legs, like kind of holding the arch or the leg drive. So a lot of people don't understand what the leg drive is. There's sort of like two types of leg drive. There's when you're just arching, if you just barely touch the bar to your chest, the leg drive is not going to actually propel the bar upwards. The leg drive is basically just holding your arch in a strong position to press from. Generally speaking, holding yourself in more of like a decline, like almost like a decline bench than a flat bench. Being in that position, it's a stronger position to press from. It's not as much of an effect that you shorten the range of motion, it's just more that it's a stronger pressing position. So you can still hold that position without your legs if your upper back is strong enough so for me, I can still keep my upper back extended, keep my sternum up pretty high. Now granted, when I was benching in the cage, up to 405, I can still hold my position really, really well. But once the weights are heavier, I can't like reverse the weight without having my like arch collapse a little bit or my chest collapse a little bit. But a lot of it just still comes from the upper back. What a lot of people think about when they think about leg drive is that they've got to let the weight sink in and then like push really hard. But before all that, most people forget to utilize, basically your leg drive should start as you're unracking the bar. So your legs should be holding you into a better position as you unrack it. They should be pressing to keep you in a good position as you lower the bar. If you always just rely on the leg drive after the bar touches, a lot of times, what I see a lot of and what I was trying to work on myself is a lot of people just touch the bar too low. So you rely on the leg drive to kind of get the bar back over your chest. And so when you're pressing the bar and it's too low above the chest, you use your shoulders too much and your chest too little. And the bar will stall, your leverages are bad. So leg drive, for me, it's there so that when I compete, I can just move more weight. But the training shouldn't rely on the leg drive. The training should rely on proper like bar path. So I've been trying to focus on building my bar path without like relying on my leg drive to just move a lot of weight in training. Because when I go back and I can use the leg drive in a competition, it'll still be there. The technique doesn't really change, but I'm not relying on it. So my focus, and it was kind of, I had to as well with my like legs, not being able to kind of go on the ground, was just focusing on touching the exact same spot every time and not letting it hit too hard, or so just being really precise with my touching the bar to my chest the same every time. What I've tried to explain to a lot of people is that the sticking point in the bench is pretty much the same for everybody. It's not going to be right at the chest, and it's not going to be at the lockout usually. It's usually going to be a few inches above the chest. Depending on how wide or close you grip the bar, it's going to be a few inches higher or lower. But basically the reason for that is when the bar gets close to your chest is stretching, and so there's a lot of tension in the chest from the stretch. It's like passive tension. So you have a lot of like energy stored in, so you're not going to get stuck there. But once that passive tension kind of springs back and kind of runs out, when the stretch on the chest isn't there anymore, you're still in a position where the ability for the chest to contract and like push the weight up is weak. As you go higher and higher, the leverages get better for your chest. So there's that point in the middle where you don't have any passive tension and you don't really have good leverage to press the weight with, and that's the sticking point. So the problem for most people is if the sticking point happens lower over the sternum or even below, your chest isn't really going to have a chance to do much. So if you press the bar down here, you're just going to wind up stalling and having your shoulders do too much of the work. If you press the bar and it drifts back over your chest, then your chest can have better and better leverage the further back you press the bar. So bodybuilders like to press the bar in a straight line over the chest, which is because they can use the chest the best. And it's the same thing that you would want to be able to do. You just can't touch the bar to your chest in a straight line like that and have your shoulders really tolerate that. So the leg drive is basically pushing the bar back to that groove where you want to get the bar, where you do have the best strength to press through the sticking point. So my biggest thing was touching the right spot so the bar would drift back towards the groove and not drift away from me where you're just trying to muscle through.
What do you think the safest weight to be at? Like, where do you find yourself strongest? Like, if you're trying to make 220, 242, what's your weight when you're training?
The safest way to cut the weight is to do it like in as short of a time as possible. So you're not like dehydrated or in a caloric deficit for very long. So if I'm training to compete at 220, I diet, so my weight is lowered, in kind of like the most strategic way, losing fat, but not dieting so fast that I lose muscle. And then when I get close to the meet, whatever the amount of weight that I have to drop at the last minute, I would want to do it in like the last 24 to 36 hours before the meet, just by dehydrating. How much? It could be like 18 pounds, it could be 21, 22. That's just to compete. So it's a lot, and it's not really my favorite part of the competing. But
Do you have a process you take, like after a week?
Almost out of time. We can do one more.
all right, we got someone over here.
How often do you deload, and what do you like to do during your deload weeks?
I don't really take a deload week except for like right before a competition. Yeah. Not really doing that. I think that's what the the light workouts are helpful with, that to kind of like pump up and feel good after the workout, not feel like the joints are kind of stiff and tired. What I try to do when I train is I really don't want to get to the point where I'm like testing my max or testing myself out too badly in the gym or going too close to like failure. I mean, it still happens, but most of the time I'm trying to just put together lots and lots and lots of good sets where the quality is high and I finish the last rep with some in the tank. Because what I'm trying to do is, whenever you train, you have to think that if I'm lifting like whatever the percent may be, if you're not lifting your max, then you're lifting a percent of your max, and you're using that percent because you think that by training with that percent, you can actually make your max stronger. Well, you're not using your max to do it. So you've got to lift whatever weight you're lifting in a way that's going to make your max go up. So if you're just going through the motions and like lifting with the minimal energy to move the weight, lifting economically, that's not going to make your max go up unless, maybe you're doing it in terms of like a hypertrophy kind of focus. But, whether I'm lifting 75% of my max or 85%, you should always lift it with the idea that you're accelerating the bar with enough force that would be enough force to lift your max. All right, thanks you guys.
know this isn't gonna be easy, but we're gonna try and get a group picture.